Get away from me, you criminal. I don't want people thinking I associate with convicts. Marcus Wellington's voice cut through the elegant restaurant like a knife, loud enough for every wealthy patron to hear. His perfectly tailored suit and gold watch gleamed under the crystal chandeliers as he stepped back from the woman who had once been his wife. Sarah Mitchell, 34 years old, stood frozen in the middle of the five-star establishment where she had come to discuss their divorce papers. She never imagined that the man who had promised to wait for her would one day use her darkest period as a weapon of public humiliation. The prison uniform was long gone, replaced by simple civilian clothes, but the shame Marcus was forcing upon her felt heavier than any shackles. "Marcus, please, let's just talk privately," she whispered, her voice trembling as curious eyes turned toward them. "I only wanted to talk." Marcus laughed coldly, adjusting his Italian silk tie. "The only thing I want from you is your signature on those papers. Do you really think a successful businessman like me can be seen with someone who spent 3 years behind bars?" The restaurant fell silent. Sarah's heart shattered as she remembered how different this same man had been just 4 years ago. She could still feel the warmth of his hand pressed against the glass partition during those early prison visits, his tearful eyes promising her that love would conquer everything. "I'll wait for you, Sarah. We'll get through this together. I know you're innocent," he had whispered through the phone, his voice breaking with emotion. But that Marcus was gone. The man standing before her now wore success like armor, and her past had become his greatest embarrassment. Sarah recalled how her letters had started coming back unopened after his first year in business, how her phone calls were blocked, how she learned through other inmates that Marcus Wellington was becoming one of the city's most celebrated tech entrepreneurs. "I waited for you to get your life together after that unfortunate incident," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "But let's be honest, Sarah. A man in my position needs a woman who can enhance his reputation, not destroy it. And frankly, no amount of rehabilitation can change what you are." Behind him stood a stunning blonde woman in a designer dress, her arm possessively linked through his. She smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had already won a war Sarah didn't even know she was fighting. Sarah's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "What I am, Marcus, is someone who took the blame for something I never did. Someone who protected the people I loved, even when it cost me everything." The words carried her back to that devastating courtroom 3.5 years ago, when she had discovered Marcus's brother David siphoning funds from their joint business account to pay gambling debts. David had been suicidal, desperate, begging her to help him avoid prison, young and deeply in love. Sarah believed that taking the blame would mean a lighter sentence, and that Marcus would understand her sacrifice. She could still see Marcus's face in the courtroom, that mask of shock and betrayal as she pleaded guilty to embezzlement she never committed. The last image burned in her memory was his back as he walked out during her sentencing. Marcus's confident smirk faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. Right, the innocent victim story. How convenient. What Marcus didn't know, what he had been too arrogant and self-absorbed to discover, was that Sarah's time in prison hadn't just taught her about survival. It had connected her with people who understood justice in ways the wealthy world never could. People who now held positions of power. People who remembered favors owed and debts unpaid. As Sarah turned to leave the restaurant, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and for the first time in months, a genuine smile crossed her face. The message was from someone Marcus would never suspect. Someone whose influence reached far beyond anything his new money could touch. While Marcus celebrated his cruelty that night, convinced he had finally rid himself of his embarrassing past, he had no idea that the woman he had just publicly destroyed was about to become the architect of his complete downfall. What he didn't know was that those 3 years behind bars had earned Sarah something far more valuable than any business degree or inheritance. The loyalty of people who now controlled the very foundations of the empire he thought made him untouchable. If you're enjoying the story of betrayal and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to discover how a man's worst mistake became a woman's greatest opportunity for justice. The next morning, Marcus's humiliation campaign was just getting started. Screenshots of Sarah from the restaurant had already found their way to local gossip blogs, with headlines reading "Tech mogul's ex-con wife finally gets the boot." But what truly crushed Sarah wasn't the public shame. It was discovering that Marcus had been systematically destroying her reputation for months. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from potential employers who had suddenly reconsidered job offers. The grocery store clerk, who used a smile, now avoided eye contact. Even her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, who had welcomed her home with homemade soup, now locked her door when Sarah walked by. "You need to understand something." Marcus's voice was ice cold when he called that afternoon. "I've worked too hard building my reputation to have it tainted by association with a criminal. I've made sure everyone knows exactly who you really are." Sarah's hands trembled as she held the phone. "Marcus, you know I was protecting your brother. You know I took the blame for embezzling money from our startup, right? The noble sacrifice story." His laugh was cruel and calculated. "Do you really think anyone cares about the details? All they see is a convicted felon trying to worm her way back into respectable society." The memory of David's desperate face flooded back to her. Marcus's younger brother discovering the gambling debts that would destroy not just him, but their entire family. Sarah could still hear his broken voice that night 3.5 years ago, when he confessed everything. "Sarah, please, I can't go to prison. I have kids. Mom's already sick. This would kill her. You're strong. You could handle a shorter sentence better than I could handle any sentence at all." She had been so naive, believing that love and loyalty meant sacrificing yourself for family. She thought Marcus would understand, that he would see her choice as noble rather than stupid. "I have a reputation to protect now, Sarah. I'm dating Amanda Harrison, yes, the senator's daughter, and we're planning to announce our engagement next month. Your little reappearance couldn't have come at a worse time." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Amanda Harrison, the blonde woman from the restaurant, wasn't just some random girlfriend. She was political royalty, the kind of woman who could elevate Marcus into circles he'd only dreamed of. Sarah realized with crushing clarity that she wasn't just an ex-wife to him anymore. She was a liability that threatened his ascent into high society. "I'm not trying to interfere with your life," Sarah whispered. "I just wanted to..." "To what? Reconnect? Catch up on old times?" Marcus's voice turned vicious. "Let me make this crystal clear. If you don't sign those divorce papers and disappear, I'll make sure every door in this city stays closed to you. I have connections now, Sarah, real power, and I'm not afraid to use it." That evening, Sarah sat in her tiny studio apartment, staring at the divorce papers that would officially erase the last connection to her old life. The space was barely 400 square feet, with a Murphy bed and a kitchenette that smelled perpetually of the Indian restaurant downstairs. It was all she could afford with her part-time job at Sunrise Cleaning Services, the only employer who hadn't conducted a thorough background check. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Marcus, but a number she recognized from her time inside. The message was simple: "Coffee tomorrow. Riverside Diner. 9 a.m. We need to talk. Carmen." Sarah's pulse quickened. Detective Carmen Rodriguez had been more than just another inmate. She'd been a decorated police officer wrongfully convicted of corruption, someone who'd used her 3 years inside to build a network of women who'd been failed by the system, women who now occupied surprising positions of influence. Sarah remembered her first week in county jail, terrified and alone, when Detective Rodriguez had approached her with a knowing look. "I can smell innocence from a mile away, kid. But innocent or not, you're here now. The question is, what are you going to do with this time? Feel sorry for yourself, or learn how the real world actually works?" Over the following months, Rodriguez had become her mentor, teaching her about justice versus law, about how power really moved through society, about the invisible networks that controlled everything from business permits to court appointments. "The people who put us here think prison breaks women," Rodriguez had said during one of their late-night conversations in the rec room. "They don't realize it can also forge them into something much more dangerous. Someone who understands how the system really works, and more importantly, how to make it work for them." Sarah looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The broken woman who had entered prison 3 years ago was gone. In her place was someone who understood that survival required more than just enduring. It required strategy, patience, and the right allies. As she prepared for bed, Sarah's phone lit up with another message, this time from a number she didn't recognize. Your ex-husband's permit applications for his new downtown development project are crossing my desk tomorrow. Thought you should know. A friend. For the first time since the restaurant humiliation, Sarah smiled. Marcus thought his wealth and connections made him untouchable. He had declared war on someone he believed was defenseless, someone whose spirit he thought he'd already broken. But the woman he'd humiliated wasn't the naive girl who'd gone to prison 3 years ago. She was someone much more dangerous, someone who'd learned that the best revenge wasn't emotional. It was systematic. And tomorrow, she would begin to show him exactly what 3 years of survival had taught her about the difference between having power and knowing how to use it. The Riverside Diner was exactly the kind of place Carmen Rodriguez would choose, tucked away in an industrial district where conversations couldn't be overheard, where former inmates could meet without drawing unwanted attention. Sarah arrived 5 minutes early, scanning the cracked vinyl booths until she spotted the familiar figure in the corner. Carmen looked different than she had in prison, orange. Now she wore a crisp navy blazer and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had clawed her way back from rock bottom. Her dark hair was pulled back in professional bun. And when she smiled at Sarah, it was the same knowing expression that had gotten her through their darkest days behind bars. "You clean up nice, Mitchell," Carmen said, sliding a coffee across the table. "Though I heard through the grapevine that your homecoming hasn't exactly been smooth sailing." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. News travels fast. Faster when it involves public humiliation at Le Bernardino. Carmen's expression hardened. "Marcus Wellington made quite the spectacle of you. Arrogant bastard doesn't realize he just made the biggest mistake of his pathetic life." Over the next hour, Carmen laid out what Sarah had only glimpsed during their prison conversations. The network they discussed in abstract terms was real, functioning, and far more extensive than Sarah had imagined. Carmen herself now worked as a private investigator specializing in corporate corruption, but more importantly, she had maintained contact with dozens of women who'd been through the system and were now positioned throughout the city's infrastructure. There's Maria Santos, works in the building permits office. Jennifer Kim handles tax assessments. Lisa Thompson processes business licenses. Angela Foster works for the health department. Carmen ticked off names like a general reviewing her troops. Every woman who got railroaded by the system, every woman who society wrote off. They remember who helped them survive, and they remember who put them there. Sarah felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope mixed with anticipation. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your ex-husband picked the wrong woman to humiliate." Carmen leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Marcus Wellington thinks success means having money and connections. He doesn't understand that real power comes from having people who owe you their lives." Carmen slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were photocopied documents, permit applications, tax records, business filings, all bearing Marcus Wellington's signature. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the scope of Marcus's current projects: a luxury hotel development, 3 high-end restaurants, and a massive residential complex that would transform an entire neighborhood. Every one of these projects requires dozens of approvals, inspections, and certifications, Carmen explained. And every approval has to go through someone. Someone who might remember a favor. Someone who might have questions about compliance. Someone who might discover discrepancies that require additional review. Sarah studied the documents, her mind racing. During their marriage, she'd helped Marcus with the business paperwork, had learned to read the regulatory language, understood the intricate web of city bureaucracy. Now she saw it with new eyes, not as obstacles to overcome, but as pressure points that could be applied with surgical precision. "This isn't about revenge," Carmen continued, reading Sarah's expression. "This is about justice, about showing a man who thinks money makes him untouchable that there are consequences for destroying people's lives." As they talked, Sarah remembered her final months in prison, when Carmen had been preparing for her own release. The former detective had spent countless hours in the law library, not just working on her own case, but studying how systems worked, how power flowed through institutions, how seemingly small actions could cascade into major consequences. Carmen had called it justice architecture, the art of using legitimate processes and proper channels to ensure that people face the consequences of their actions. The beautiful thing about justice architecture, Carmen had explained during those late-night conversations, is that it's completely legal. You're not breaking any rules. You're just making sure all the existing rules get followed, to the letter. Now, sitting in the diner, Sarah felt those lessons crystallizing into something concrete. Marcus had spent the last 3 years building his empire, while assuming she was broken, defeated, forgotten. He'd celebrated publicly humiliating her because he believed she had no power, no connections, no way to fight back. "There's something else," Carmen said, pulling out her phone. She showed Sarah a news article from that morning. Wellington Tech announces major expansion, eyes public trading. The article featured a photograph of Marcus standing next to Amanda Harrison at a charity gala, both of them radiating the confidence of people who believe they control their own destiny. "He's going public with his company next year," Carmen explained. "That means SEC filings, investor scrutiny, background checks on all major stakeholders. It also means that any hint of irregularity in his business practices could tank the entire deal." Sarah felt a slow smile spread across her face as the full picture became clear. Marcus wasn't just successful, he was vulnerable. His wealth was built on a house of cards that required constant maintenance, constant approvals, constant compliance with regulations he probably took for granted. "How long?" Sarah asked. 6 months, maybe less. Carmen gathered up the documents. "By then, every project he has in motion will either be completed successfully or he'll discover that success requires more than just money and arrogance." As they prepared to leave, Carmen placed a hand on Sarah's arm. "Remember what I taught you inside. Patience is the ultimate weapon. Marcus thinks he won when he humiliated you last night. Let him think that. Let him get comfortable. Let him get careless. The best part about justice architecture is that the target never sees it coming until the whole structure comes down around them." Walking back to her apartment, Sarah felt fundamentally different than she had 24 hours earlier. The broken woman who'd stood in that restaurant was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true power didn't come from wealth or status. It came from understanding how systems worked and having the patience to use them properly. Marcus had declared war on someone he thought was powerless. What he didn't realize was that he'd just given that person both the motivation and the opportunity to show him the difference between being rich and being smart. And over the next few months, Sarah Wellington was going to provide him with a very expensive education in the consequences of underestimating the wrong woman. 6 months later, Marcus Wellington stood in his corner office overlooking the city skyline, reading the email that would destroy everything he'd built. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the official notification from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Immediate suspension of public offering. Regulatory compliance violations under investigation. The phone on his mahogany desk rang incessantly. Investors, board members, reporters. Everyone wanted answers he didn't have. His IPO, scheduled to launch in 2 weeks and valued at $500 million, had just evaporated with a single government letter. "Sir," his assistant knocked nervously on the door. "Channel 7 News is here. They're asking about the federal investigation into Wellington Tech's business practices." Marcus's blood ran cold. Federal investigation? He grabbed the remote and turned on the television, where a serious-faced reporter stood outside his building. "This is Rebecca Chun reporting live from downtown, where federal investigators have just raided the offices of Wellington Tech. Sources close to the investigation tell us that founder Marcus Wellington is being investigated for tax evasion, permit fraud, and systematic bribery of city officials. The investigation appears to have been triggered by a comprehensive dossier of evidence submitted to multiple regulatory agencies over the past several months." The room began to spin. Marcus sank into his leather chair as the reporter continued. Perhaps most damaging are the recorded phone calls between Wellington and various city officials, discussing what prosecutors are calling systematic corruption involving his downtown development projects. We're told these recordings were provided by a confidential informant with extensive knowledge of Wellington's business operations. Marcus's mind raced back to all his phone calls over the past months. The casual conversations with permit officers, the off-the-record discussions about expediting approvals, the envelopes of cash he'd personally delivered to ensure his project stayed on schedule. How could anyone have recorded those conversations? How could anyone have known? His office door burst open, and Amanda Harrison stormed in, her perfectly composed political facade cracking for the first time since he'd known her. Her father, Senator Harrison, was known for his zero-tolerance stance on corruption, and their engagement announcement was supposed to happen at a charity gala that evening. Marcus, what the hell is this? Amanda threw a newspaper on his desk. The headline read, Senator's daughter engaged to corrupt businessman. Below, it was a photograph of them together, but now it looked like evidence of political scandal rather than a society announcement. Amanda, I can explain. Explain? My father is in damage control mode. The press is camping outside his house. 20 years of his political career could be destroyed because I'm associated with you. Her voice rose with each word. And the recordings, Marcus. They have recordings of you bribing city officials. How could you be so stupid? As she spoke, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Enjoying the news coverage? This is what happens when you destroy innocent people. Hope the view from the bottom is instructive. A friend. For the first time, the pieces began clicking into place. The systematic nature of the investigation. The precision of the evidence. The timing that destroyed not just his business, but his personal life. This wasn't random regulatory enforcement. This was targeted, personal, and devastatingly effective. There's more, Amanda continued, scrolling through her phone. Someone leaked your financial records to the IRS. Apparently, you've been underreporting income for years, and the health department just shut down all 3 of your restaurants for serious health code violations that appear to have been deliberately concealed through falsified inspection reports. Marcus remembered Sarah's words from that day in the restaurant. What I am is someone who took the blame for something I never did. Someone who protected the people I loved, even when it cost me everything. At the time, he dismissed it as self-pity from a convicted criminal. Now, those words took on a chilling new meaning. His phone rang again. This time it was his lawyer. Marcus, we have a serious problem. The FBI has frozen all your business accounts. They're claiming you've been involved in a pattern of racketeering that goes back to the founding of your company. And there's something else. They have evidence suggesting your initial startup capital came from the embezzlement your ex-wife was convicted of. The blood drained from Marcus's face. The startup money, the funds that David had stolen and that Sarah had taken the blame for, had never actually been returned. Marcus had used that money to launch his first business venture, telling himself he deserved compensation for the humiliation Sarah had caused him. How do they know about that? Marcus whispered. Someone provided them with detailed financial records showing the money trail. Banking records, transaction histories, everything. Marcus, if they can prove you knowingly used stolen funds to start your business, this goes from financial crimes to organized fraud conspiracy. Amanda was already gathering her purse and coat. I can't be here when they arrest you, Marcus. My father's reputation can't survive this association. Amanda, please. Please what? Please stand by you while you destroy my family's political legacy? Please pretend I didn't know about your criminal behavior. She paused at the door, her expression a mixture of disgust and pity. I actually thought you were impressive when we met. Successful, powerful, confident. Now I see you're just a petty criminal who got lucky for a few years. As Amanda left, Marcus's assistant appeared again. Sir, there are federal agents in the lobby. They're asking to speak with you. Marcus looked out his window at the city he'd once thought he was conquering. 6 months ago, he'd been on top of the world, publicly humiliating his ex-wife and celebrating his engagement to political royalty. Now, federal agents were coming to arrest him. His fiancée had abandoned him, his business was destroyed, and the woman he dismissed as a powerless ex-convict had orchestrated the complete destruction of everything he'd built. He thought about Sarah sitting in that tiny apartment, signing divorce papers while he enjoyed his newfound success. He'd been so confident that his money and connections made him untouchable, so certain that she was broken and defeated. What he'd never considered was that those 3 years in prison had taught her something far more valuable than anything he'd learned in business school: patience, strategy, and a kind of justice that came not from revenge, but from simply ensuring that people face the consequences of their own actions. As the federal agents entered his office, Marcus finally understood that the woman he'd humiliated in that restaurant hadn't been defeated at all. She'd been planning. And now, as everything he built crumbled around him, he realized that Sarah Mitchell had just taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. Some people you should never underestimate, and some bridges you should never burn. The view from the top, as it turned out, was nothing compared to the clarity you gain on the way down. 2 years later, Sarah Mitchell stood in the marble lobby of Mitchell & Associates Legal Consulting, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as clients arrived for their morning appointments. The firm she'd built from nothing now occupied 3 floors of downtown high-rise, specializing in helping wrongfully convicted individuals navigate the complex world of post-release legal challenges. Her assistant knocked gently on the office door. "Ms. Mitchell, your 10 a.m. appointment is here. It's Detective Rodriguez." Carmen Rodriguez walked in wearing the same knowing smile that had sustained Sarah through their darkest days. But now she carried herself with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose life's work had finally aligned with justice. She'd recently been appointed as the city's new Inspector General for Correctional Affairs, a position created specifically to investigate systemic corruption in the justice system. "You look good in success, Sarah," Carmen said, settling into the leather chair across from Sarah's desk. "I heard through the grapevine that Wellington finally got sentenced yesterday." Sarah nodded, though she felt no joy in Marcus's downfall. The federal judge had sentenced him to 8 years in minimum security prison for corruption, tax evasion, and conspiracy charges. The irony wasn't lost on either woman. Marcus would now experience the same federal system that had shaped Sarah into the person who'd engineered his downfall. 8 years, Sarah repeated quietly. The same amount of time he thought I deserved for protecting his brother. Except he actually committed the crimes he's being punished for, Carmen pointed out. There's a difference between justice and revenge, and you never cross that line. Through the window, Sarah could see the construction site, where Marcus's luxury hotel development was supposed to have been built. The lot remained empty, surrounded by chain-link fencing and property seized by federal government signs. The city had reclaimed the land when Marcus defaulted on his permits, and it would eventually become affordable housing. A fitting transformation that Sarah found quietly satisfying. Carmen pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk. "Speaking of justice, I wanted you to see this personally." Inside was a document Sarah had been waiting 3 years to read. Formal exoneration and record expungement. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. David Wellington finally came forward. Carmen explained. Apparently, watching his brother's trial gave him a crisis of conscience. He provided a full confession to the embezzlement charges you took the fall for. The DA's office has officially cleared your record and issued a formal apology. Sarah stared at the document that officially erased her criminal history. David's confession meant that the startup money Marcus had used to build his empire was now legally recognized as proceeds from a crime, which explained why the federal government had been so aggressive in seizing his assets. "There's more," Carmen continued. "The city is offering you a substantial settlement for wrongful conviction. 7 figures, Sarah. Enough to expand your firm, maybe start that foundation you talked about." Sarah thought about the foundation she'd been planning, an organization to help women leaving prison rebuild their lives, to teach them the same lessons Carmen had taught her about turning systematic oppression into systematic justice. The settlement money would fund it for decades. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Ms. Mitchell?" Her assistant looked apologetic. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's personal. Amanda Harrison." Sarah exchanged a glance with Carmen, who raised an eyebrow with interest. Amanda Harrison had disappeared from public view after Marcus's arrest, her political aspirations destroyed by the association with corruption. Amanda entered the office looking nothing like the confident woman who'd stood beside Marcus in that restaurant. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple business suit. Her perfect political composure had been replaced by something rawer, regret, maybe even humility. "I know I have no right to be here," Amanda began, her voice lacking its former arrogance. "I know what I said to you that night was unforgivable. I came to apologize and to tell you something I think you deserve to know." She took a breath before continuing. Marcus called me from prison last week. He wanted me to visit him to, I don't know, maybe rekindle something. When I said no, he started ranting about how you destroyed his life, how you'd orchestrated everything out of spite. Amanda paused, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. I told him he was wrong. I told him that what you did wasn't spite. It was justice. And that maybe if he'd shown you half the loyalty you'd shown him, none of this would have happened. Sarah studied Amanda's face, looking for signs of manipulation or political calculation, but found only genuine remorse. I lost everything because of my association with him, Amanda continued. My father's career, my own political future, my reputation. But you know what? I deserved to lose it. Because I stood there in that restaurant and watched him humiliate someone who'd sacrificed everything for his family, and I laughed. I was complicit in cruelty, and I'm getting exactly what I earned. After Amanda left, Sarah and Carmen sat in comfortable silence, watching the city move below them. Sarah thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Broken, desperate, willing to sacrifice herself for people who'd ultimately abandoned her. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true power came not from wealth or connections, but from understanding how systems worked and having the patience to use them justly. You know what the beautiful thing is? Carmen said finally, Marcus still doesn't understand what actually happened to him. He thinks you destroyed his life out of revenge. He can't comprehend that you just made sure he faced the consequences of his own actions. Sarah nodded, thinking about the recording devices Carmen's network had helped her obtain, the careful documentation of Marcus's increasingly brazen corruption, the patient months of building an airtight case through legitimate channels. It hadn't been revenge. It had been accountability. Her phone buzzed with text from David Wellington. Sarah, I know this doesn't undo what I put you through, but I hope my confession helps. You saved my life once, even though it cost you yours. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to do the right thing. As the afternoon sun streamed through her office windows, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Marcus had tried to break her by taking away her freedom, her reputation, her future. Instead, he'd inadvertently given her something far more valuable. The knowledge that true justice didn't come from destroying your enemies, but from building something better than what they'd tried to tear down. The woman who'd stood in that restaurant 2 years ago, humiliated and powerless, had used that humiliation as a foundation for something Marcus's money could never buy, a legacy of hoping others find their own path to justice. Sarah Mitchell had learned that the best revenge wasn't personal at all. It was proving that some things were more powerful than wealth, more lasting than status, and more satisfying than any momentary triumph could ever be. Marcus Wellington thought money made him untouchable. Sarah Mitchell proved that justice, patience, and understanding how the world really works made her unstoppable. And, in the end, that made all the difference. If this story of redemption and true justice inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of people who turned their greatest defeats into their most powerful victories. Remember, sometimes the best way to overcome those who wronged you isn't to destroy them. It's to build something so much better that their cruelty becomes irrelevant.